Your brain is rotting and you already know it. You feel it every time you reach for your phone before your eyes are fully open. You feel it in the hollowness that follows every scroll session, every binge, every click that promised satisfaction and delivered nothing but the need for another click. The worst part is not that you are doing it. The worst part is that you know you are doing it and you cannot stop. You have tried. God knows you have tried. And yet here you are again, watching your focus dissolve, your motivation evaporate, your ability to feel genuine pleasure from real accomplishment fade into background noise. Let me tell you something that might actually help. This is not a character flaw. This is not weakness. This is not a lack of discipline or willpower or any of the moral failures that the self-help industrial complex has convinced you to feel guilty about. This is neurobiology. This is a specific chemical system in your brain being systematically destroyed by an environment it was never designed to handle. And unless you understand exactly how this mechanism works, you will keep trying to fix it with the same strategies that got you here in the first place. There is a circuit in your brain actively sabotaging your ability to feel satisfaction from real achievement. Evolution put it there 200,000 years ago, and it worked perfectly until about 15 years ago. The circuit is called the mesolimbic dopamine pathway. You have heard of dopamine. Everyone has heard of dopamine. It is the pleasure chemical, right? Wrong. That is the first lie, and it is the reason you are stuck. Dopamine is not pleasure. Dopamine is anticipation. Dopamine is the chemical signature of wanting, not having. It is the neurological representation of effort might equal reward. And your ancestors needed that system to survive because on the African savanna, effort actually did equal reward most of the time. You see a fig tree in the distance, dopamine fires, you walk 2 miles, you get figs, your brain confirms the prediction, you survive another day. You spot a potential mate, dopamine fires. You engage in elaborate social grooming and status displays. You reproduce. Your genes continue. Simple, brutal, effective. The system worked because the environment was honest. The delay between wanting and getting filtered out false signals. If the fig tree was real, you got figs. If it was a mirage, you learned. The learning is the critical part. Your dopamine system is a prediction engine and it updates its predictions based on reality. But here is what nobody told you. The system cannot distinguish between a real reward and a synthetic one. It cannot tell the difference between the dopamine spike from hunting down food after hours of tracking and the dopamine spike from a notification lighting up your screen. Both register as prediction confirmed. Both tell your brain this behavior is worth repeating. Except one required effort, risk, delayed gratification, and genuine skill. The other required you to exist in proximity to a device designed by the smartest behavioral psychologists in human history, specifically to hack this exact pathway. You are living in the first moment in human history where the effort-to-reward ratio has been completely inverted. Your great-great-grandfather had to work for every single dopamine hit he ever got. Physical labor, social navigation, real-world problem-solving. Every reward came with a cost, and that cost kept the system calibrated. You can get dopamine hits laying in bed at 3 in the morning, scrolling through algorithmically optimized content designed to keep you scrolling. No effort, no risk, no skill. Just the bottomless abundance of synthetic reward, and your brain is not equipped to handle abundance. Your brain is a scarcity management system dropped into an environment of infinite availability. What happens to any biological system when you give it unlimited access to the thing it evolved to desperately seek? It breaks. Not catastrophically, not all at once. Slowly, quietly. The way a river carves a canyon, the mechanism is called downregulation, and it is happening in your brain right now. Every time you flood your system with easy dopamine, your neurons respond by reducing the number of dopamine receptors on their surface. It is a protective mechanism. Too much signal causes damage, so the system turns down the volume. Except you are not in control of the volume anymore. The apps are, the algorithms are. The content creators who have monetized your attention are. They keep turning up the intensity because their survival depends on it, and your neurons keep turning down the sensitivity because their survival depends on it. and you are caught in the middle, watching your ability to feel anything from normal human experiences slowly dissolve. This is why nothing feels good anymore. This is why accomplishments that should feel satisfying feel empty. This is why you can complete a project you have worked on for months and feel nothing except the urge to check your phone. Your baseline dopamine sensitivity has been recalibrated to expect constant stimulation, and real life cannot compete with that. Real life is slow. Real life requires effort. Real life has friction and boredom and delayed gratification built into its structure, and your downregulated dopamine system experiences all of that as pain, not metaphorical pain. Actual neurological discomfort. The same circuitry that makes a heroin addict feel sick during withdrawal is active in your brain when you try to sit with boredom or do deep work or have a conversation without checking your phone. You are not weak. You are experiencing a predictable biological response to overstimulation. The problem is not your character. The problem is your environment, and unless you change the environment, you will not fix the receptor density, and unless you fix the receptor density, you will continue to feel like a ghost in your own life. Let me pause here for a second and ask you a question that maybe no one has ever asked you. What is the worst part of living with this internal struggle? Not what you tell people, but the part you carry in silence. I want you to know something. What you are feeling is more common than you imagine. Thousands of people are watching this video right now, carrying exactly the same weight. If you have the courage, leave a comment telling me what is the hardest part for you. Your honesty might make someone else feel less alone today. Now let me continue showing you how to break this pattern. The solution is not willpower. Willpower is a finite resource, and you are trying to use a finite resource to fight an infinite content stream backed by billion-dollar companies whose entire business model depends on defeating your willpower. You will lose that fight every single time. The solution is system design. You need to reverse engineer the environmental conditions that allowed your ancestors to maintain healthy dopamine function and impose those conditions on your modern life. This is not about going back to living in caves. This is about understanding what specific features of the ancestral environment kept the dopamine system calibrated and replicating those features in a contemporary context. The first feature is scarcity. Your ancestors did not have unlimited access to rewarding stimuli. They had to work for every dopamine hit, and the work created natural spacing between hits. That spacing is not optional. That spacing is what allows your receptors to upregulate back to normal density. The second feature is variability. Rewards in the ancestral environment were unpredictable. Sometimes you found food, sometimes you did not. Sometimes the hunt succeeded, sometimes it failed. That variability kept the dopamine system sharp because it had to stay sensitive to detect rare opportunities. Modern cheap dopamine is perfectly predictable. Every single time you open the app, you get the hit. Your brain stops treating it as a valuable signal and starts treating it as baseline noise. The third feature is effort coupling. Every ancestral reward required physical or cognitive effort to obtain. The effort primes the dopamine system to register the reward as significant. When reward comes without effort, your brain does not register it as valuable even if it produces a dopamine spike. This is why you can scroll for 3 hours, get thousands of microdopamine hits, and end the session feeling worse than when you started. Volume without meaning is worse than scarcity with meaning. Here is the protocol. I am not going to sugarcoat this. This is not easy. This is not comfortable. This is metabolically expensive and psychologically difficult, and you are going to hate parts of it. But it works, and the reason it works is because it is based on how the actual machinery functions, not on motivational fantasies about who you wish you were. Step 1 is what researchers call dopaminergic fasting, but what I want you to think of as receptor recovery. You need to create a period of time where your dopamine system is not being artificially stimulated, so your neurons can upregulate receptor density back toward normal levels. The minimum effective dose is 72 hours, 3 full days with zero access to cheap dopamine sources. That means no social media, no pornography, no video games, no streaming content, no news feeds, no YouTube, No TikTok, no Instagram, no Reddit, no junk food, no alcohol, no recreational drugs, no online shopping, no sports highlights, no podcast binges, nothing that gives you a reward without corresponding effort. You are going to feel awful. You are going to feel bored, irritable, anxious, restless. You are going to experience what addicts call anhedonia, which is the clinical term for nothing feels good. This is not a sign you are doing it wrong. This is a sign you are doing it right. This is your baseline dopamine sensitivity beginning to recover, and your brain realizing it has been operating in a deficit state for months or years. Sit with it. The discomfort is information. The discomfort is your nervous system recalibrating. During these 72 hours, you need to replace cheap dopamine with what I call friction-based activities. These are activities that require effort, have variable outcomes, and produce genuine skill development. Read physical books, the kind made of paper. Go for long walks without headphones. Have face-to-face conversations. Cook actual meals from raw ingredients. Do bodyweight exercises. Write by hand. Solve puzzles. Build something with your hands. The point is not to enjoy these activities. The point is to teach your brain that reward requires effort again. You are reconditioning the prediction engine. After the initial 72-hour reset, you need to maintain what I call strategic scarcity. This is not about eliminating all sources of easy dopamine forever. That is not realistic, and it is not necessary. This is about creating boundaries that prevent your system from getting flooded again. The research on this is very clear. Intermittent exposure to high dopamine activities maintains sensitivity better than complete abstinence or unlimited access. You need rules, not guidelines, not intentions. Hard rules enforced by environmental design, not willpower. One effective protocol is time boxing. You allow yourself access to high dopamine activities for a specific window each day, and you make that window inconvenient to access outside of the designated time. For most people, a 90-minute window in the evening works. You physically put your phone in a different room during work hours. You use website blockers with random password generation, so you cannot disable them impulsively. You delete apps from your phone and only access them through a browser, so every use requires deliberate friction. The goal is to increase the effort cost of accessing the reward so your brain starts valuing it appropriately again. Another protocol is coupling. Every time you want to access a cheap dopamine source, you have to complete a friction-based activity first. Want to scroll social media? Do 50 push-ups first. Want to watch YouTube? Read 20 pages of a physical book first. This is not punishment. This is classical conditioning. You are training your dopamine system to associate effort with reward again. The neuroscience here is straightforward. Dopamine release is higher when a reward is preceded by effort, because the effort creates prediction uncertainty, which makes the reward signal stronger. The third component is what Marcus Aurelius called voluntary discomfort. The Stoics understood something about human psychology that modern neuroscience has confirmed. Regularly exposing yourself to manageable discomfort recalibrates your hedonic set point. Your brain measures pleasure and pain relative to your recent experience, not in absolute terms. If your baseline is constant comfort, anything less than comfort feels like suffering. If your baseline includes regular discomfort, normal comfort feels like luxury. This is not about being masochistic. This is about manipulating your comparison mechanisms. Cold exposure is the most efficient method. Start your day with a cold shower, not lukewarm, actually cold as your tap goes. Start with 30 seconds and build to 3 minutes. The dopamine spike from cold exposure lasts for hours, and it is produced by your body in response to a real stressor, not by an app designed to addict you. Your brain registers this as earned reward. Fasting is another effective protocol. Go 16 hours between dinner and your first meal the next day. Not because of metabolic benefits, although those exist. Because hunger is discomfort, and sitting with hunger without immediately satisfying it trains your tolerance for delayed gratification. Every time you successfully delay gratification, you are strengthening the prefrontal circuits that regulate impulsive behavior. Here is what nobody tells you about dopamine recovery. It is not linear. You will have days where you feel like your focus is returning, where activities that felt meaningless start to feel engaging again, where you can sit with a difficult task without your attention fragmenting every 90 seconds. And then you will have days where it feels like you have made no progress at all, where the urge to escape into easy stimulation is overwhelming, where every moment of boredom feels unbearable. This is normal. This is how neuroplasticity works. Your brain is not a computer that you reprogram with a software update. Your brain is biological tissue that reorganizes itself through repeated experience over time. The timeline most people experience is 2 weeks for acute withdrawal symptoms to diminish, 6 weeks for noticeable improvements in baseline mood and focus, 12 weeks for substantial recovery of dopamine receptor density. But this is an average, and averages hide variation. Some people feel better in days, some people take months. Your genetics, your history of stimulation, your current stress levels, your sleep quality, your nutrition, all of it influences the timeline. The only thing you can control is whether you stick with the protocol. Let me give you the evolutionary context that makes this make sense. Your ancestors lived in a world where boredom was productive. Boredom was the signal that made you go explore, go hunt, go create, go socialize. Boredom was the gap between rewards that kept your dopamine system hungry and sensitive. Modern life has eliminated boredom. Every spare moment can be filled with stimulation. You are standing in line at the grocery store and you are scrolling. You are sitting in traffic and you are checking notifications. You are having a conversation and you are half present because part of your attention is monitoring your pocket for vibrations. This constant stimulation is not making you happier. It is making you less capable of happiness because happiness requires contrast. Happiness requires the experience of wanting, followed by the experience of getting, followed by a period of satiation, before wanting begins again. When wanting and getting happen simultaneously and continuously, the whole system breaks down. You end up in a state of permanent wanting that can never be satisfied because satisfaction requires pause, and you have eliminated pause from your life. Seneca wrote something 2,000 years ago that applies perfectly here. He said the man who is everywhere is nowhere. He was talking about attention. If your attention is split across infinite sources of stimulation, you are not actually experiencing any of them. You are skimming the surface of experience without ever going deep enough to extract meaning. And meaning is what your dopamine system actually evolved to detect, not pleasure. Meaning. The fig tree mattered because it meant survival. The successful hunt mattered because it meant status and resources. The deep conversation mattered because it meant alliance and belonging. These things produced dopamine because they were genuinely significant to your survival and reproduction. Instagram likes are not significant. YouTube comments are not significant. The number of followers you have is not significant in any real biological sense, and your dopamine system knows this at some level, even if your conscious mind has been convinced otherwise. This is why cheap dopamine feels hollow. You are getting the chemical signal without the underlying meaning that is supposed to accompany it. You are hacking the reward system, but you are not actually achieving anything worth rewarding. The way out is not to fight your biology. The way out is to work with your biology by recreating the environmental conditions under which your biology functions correctly. You need scarcity. You need effort. You need variability. You need friction. You need boredom, not because these things are morally virtuous, but because these things are mechanistically necessary for healthy dopamine function. This is not a philosophical argument. This is applied neuroscience. When you create artificial scarcity around rewarding stimuli, your dopamine system becomes more sensitive. When you couple rewards with effort, your brain registers them as more valuable. When you introduce variability, your system stays engaged. When you add friction, you prevent the mindless overconsumption that leads to downregulation. When you allow boredom, you create the space for genuine motivation to emerge. All of this is measurable. All of this shows up in receptor density studies, in functional imaging, in longitudinal outcome data. This is not theory. This is mechanism. One more thing you need to understand. The companies that produce cheap dopamine are not evil. They are just optimizing for the wrong metric. They optimize for engagement because engagement generates revenue, and they have built the most sophisticated engagement optimization systems in human history. They employ neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists and AI researchers whose entire job is to figure out how to keep you on the platform for one more minute. And they are very good at their jobs. You are not going to beat them with willpower. You are not going to beat them with good intentions. You are only going to beat them by understanding the game they are playing and refusing to play it. That means deleting the apps. That means blocking the websites. That means creating physical distance between yourself and the devices. That means building a life that is sufficiently engaging without artificial stimulation that you do not need artificial stimulation to fill the gaps. This is hard. This is harder than any diet or exercise program because those things only require changing your behavior. This requires changing your entire relationship with reward and boredom and discomfort and meaning. But here is what happens when you do it. Your focus comes back, not all at once, gradually. You will notice you can read for 30 minutes without checking your phone, then 60 minutes, then 90. You will notice you can have a conversation and actually be present for it instead of waiting for your turn to talk while monitoring your notification anxiety in the background. You will notice that accomplishments start to feel satisfying again. Finishing a project, solving a problem, helping someone, creating something, these start to produce the dopamine response they are supposed to produce because your system is sensitive enough to register them as meaningful again. You will notice that boredom stops feeling like a crisis. You can sit in a waiting room without entertainment and it is just sitting. You can go for a walk without podcasts and it is just walking. The constant low-level anxiety that comes from perpetual stimulation starts to fade. Your baseline state becomes calmer because your nervous system is not constantly trying to process infinite inputs. Sleep improves because your brain is not in a state of hyper-arousal from hours of screen time before bed. Decision-making improves because your prefrontal cortex is not being constantly interrupted and fragmented. Relationships improve because you are actually available for genuine connection instead of performing connection while monitoring digital connection. This is not a small thing. This is getting your life back. This is recovering the capacity for sustained attention and genuine pleasure and meaningful accomplishment that you thought you had lost permanently. If you made it this far, I already know something important about you. You do not just want to survive your own mind, you want to master it. This channel is not about magic promises. It is about real people sharing real tools that work in the real world. If this makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel. Not because I am asking, but because you deserve a place where you can learn to build the version of yourself you always knew was in there. Biology is destiny until you hack it. One final thing. Everything I have shared here is for educational purposes. This is information synthesis based on neuroscience research and evolutionary psychology, not medical advice. If you are experiencing symptoms of depression, anxiety, addiction, or any other mental health condition, please consult with a qualified healthcare professional. The protocols I have described can complement professional treatment, but they are not a replacement for it. You deserve proper care, and proper care sometimes means professional intervention. Do not try to suffer through serious mental health issues alone. Get help. The brain is machinery, and sometimes machinery needs a mechanic who knows what they are doing. Everything discussed here is about optimization for people who are functional but underperforming. If you are not functional, that is a different conversation, and that conversation needs to happen with someone who has credentials and clinical experience. Take care of yourself. You only get one nervous system. Treat it accordingly.